All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously mind-expanding stuff today?
I am always up for a good deep dive.
Okay, cool. Because you wanted to explore mystical experiences, right? Those
Yeah.
moments when people feel connected to something bigger than themselves.
Right.
Well, we went through that lecture transcript you sent over. And wow, it is packed with incredible stories.
Yeah, it's really amazing the range of human experience. All those moments where we get a glimpse of a reality beyond our everyday perceptions.
Yeah, and the source uses this term epiphany a lot. What do they even mean by that?
Well, they're talking about those sudden flashes of insight, those moments where the veil of ordinary reality seems to lift, and we get a glimpse of something deeper, something sacred.
So it's like suddenly remembering that we're spiritual beings,
Oh.
having like a human experience, not the other way around.
Exactly, and it's often described as a feeling of deep connection, of unity with everything, almost like tapping into a universal energy source.
That's cool. But here's a question that popped into my head while I was reading this. Do these epiphanies just randomly happen? Or can you, like, cultivate them somehow?
That's a fascinating question, and the source actually presents both sides. Some of these experiences are described as completely spontaneous, like a bolt out of the blue.
Uh,
But others mention achieving these states through things like meditation or deep contemplation.
so it's like some people stumble upon this hidden door, and others are, like, actively searching for the key.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it raises the question about the role of intentionality. What's so fascinating is that the source seems to suggest that certain practices might help create the right conditions internally for these experiences to emerge.
So it's not just random.
Not necessarily, no.
Interesting. So, okay, let's say someone has one of these epiphanies. How do they even begin to explain what it felt like? How do you put that kind of experience into words?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. The source even quotes someone saying that the moment you name God, he ceases to be God.
Wow, that's deep.
It really is. It's like trying to describe the taste of water. You just have to experience it.
You just know it when you know it.
Exactly.
But the source does give some pretty evocative descriptions, right? Like
Right.
things like feeling overwhelming joy and love, a sense of unity with everything, even seeing the world bathed in light and music.
Absolutely. And while the specific imagery varies, they all seem to point to this sense of transcendence, this feeling that reality is far more wondrous and interconnected
Mm.
than we usually perceive.
Yeah, it's like our everyday awareness is just the tip of the iceberg. And these experiences give us a glimpse of what lies beneath.
That is a great analogy.
Mm.
It's like suddenly seeing the world in high definition after only ever experiencing it in standard definition.
Totally. You know, one thing that really jumped out at me in the source was the recurring theme of nature. As a catalyst for these experiences, why do you think nature seems to play such a big role?
Well, the source suggests that nature acts as a powerful conduit because it doesn't operate with the same kind of ego and self-consciousness that we humans do. Being in nature allows us to quiet our internal chatter and become more receptive to this universal energy.
Oh, I see. It's like all our mental noise creates static, making it harder to tune into that deeper frequency.
Exactly. So source actually mentions this one example. Someone who felt incredible oneness with an oak tree, almost like the boundaries between them dissolved. He could feel the sap rising within himself, as if they were sharing the same life force.
Wow, that's incredible. It makes you wonder if we've lost touch with that innate connection to the natural world, and maybe these experiences are a way of remembering it.
That's a really insightful point, and it makes me think about how our modern urbanized lifestyle might be contributing to this disconnect.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about seeing the world differently, feeling this deep connection, but the source also mentions perceiving this divine energy not just visually, but also as sound or vibration. What's that all about?
Well, think of it this way. We're used to experiencing the world through our five senses. But what if there's a deeper level of perception? A sixth sense that allows us to tune into the underlying vibration of existence.
So it's not about literal sounds, but more of a sensing or a feeling.
Exactly. It's like being able to hear the energy behind everything, like a cosmic symphony orchestrating the dance of life.
Okay, now I'm really curious about what this cosmic symphony might sound like.
Well, the source doesn't really offer specific auditory descriptions, but it does connect this concept to the ancient Greek idea of the logos.
The logos, I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's often described as the divine word or vibration. That underpins all creation, the source of all energy and intelligence in the universe, the creative force that brings everything into being.
So it's like the source code of reality.
I love that analogy. And the source suggests that these experiences of hearing colors or sensing a cosmic vibration might be glimpses into this underlying energy, this creative force that connects us all.
That's mind-blowing. So these experiences aren't just about feeling good or connected to nature. They're about tapping into something much deeper, something that speaks to the very essence of reality.
Precisely. And that's where it gets really interesting. If these experiences are glimpses into a deeper level of reality, what does that tell us about the nature of existence itself? What does it mean for how we live our lives?
Those are some big questions. But before we get too deep into that existential rabbit hole, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier about intentionality. The source talks about both spontaneous and intentional mystical experiences. But what about the folks who aren't necessarily having these big dramatic epiphanies? Can anyone access this deeper level of reality, or are some people just more sensitive to it?
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us to another fascinating aspect of the source material. They delve into the unique perspective of children and how their experiences might offer some valuable insights.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's unpack that in part two of our deep dive.
When we think about these mystical experiences, we often picture these like big life-altering events.
Yeah.
But the source makes this really interesting point about the perspective of children.
Yeah, you mentioned that at the end of part one. What's so special about how kids experience this stuff?
Well, the source suggests that children haven't developed the same like intellectual filters and skepticism that adults have. So they're often much more open to experiencing the world with this sense of wonder and awe.
It's like they haven't learned to dismiss the things that we can't easily, explain or categorize. They're still plugged into that sense of magic and possibility.
Exactly. There's this great story in the source about a young girl standing on a hilltop, and she describes feeling enclosed in this like warm, lucent bubble of livingness with the wind and the grass and a foxglove at her feet.
Wow, that's such a vivid description.
It really is.
It really captures that sense of interconnectedness, of everything being alive and vibrant.
And the source highlights how children often perceive this interconnectedness very naturally, without needing complex philosophical frameworks
Yeah.
or spiritual practices.
So it's like we're all born with this capacity. But then somewhere along the way, a lot of us lose touch with it.
That's a really compelling idea. It makes me wonder if there are ways to reawaken that childlike sense of wonder as adults.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. The source talks about adults who have these experiences too, even people who don't consider themselves spiritual or religious at all.
That's right. And it often seems to happen out in nature. They mention a man who considered his belief in a higher power to be purely intellectual, until he had this profound experience of oneness with an oak tree while walking in the woods.
He went from head knowledge to a real experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. And it highlights how these experiences aren't just for like a select few or whatever. They're available to anyone who is open to them.
Okay, but if this divine energy, this interconnectedness, if it's really present in everything, why don't more people experience it? Is it just a matter of sensitivity or perception?
That's a great question. The source doesn't give a definitive answer, but it does suggest that our internal state plays a big role.
You mean if we're constantly stressed and distracted, we're less likely to notice these subtle whispers of the divine?
That's one possibility. It's like trying to appreciate a delicate flower while you're running through a field. You might trample it without even noticing.
So we need to slow down and pay attention
Exactly.
to cultivate a sense of stillness.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And the source emphasizes that this isn't just about having these grand mystical experiences,
Yeah.
like out of nature. It's about recognizing the divine in everyday life, in the ordinary moments, in the seemingly mundane things around us.
Okay, so it's not just about sunsets and mountains.
Not at all. The source describes someone looking at a handful of sand and suddenly seeing the intricate beauty and perfection of each tiny grain. It was like they were seeing the world with new eyes, recognizing the divine spark in everything.
That's so cool. It's about shifting our perspective, paying attention to the details, and finding that sense of awe.
Precisely. And it makes me think about how much we miss when we're just like on autopilot, rushing through our day without really seeing the world around us.
So it's about being present and mindful,
Exactly.
cultivating a sense of curiosity, like a child exploring the world for the first time.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the idea of intentionality. We've talked about how some people cultivate these experiences through practices like meditation or contemplation. But the source suggests there might be other ways to invite these moments of deeper awareness into our lives.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What are some of those other pathways?
Well, the source explores this fascinating concept, the idea of perceiving this divine energy not just visually, but also through sound and vibration. It's like tuning into a cosmic symphony. That underlies all of existence.
We talked about this earlier, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on what that actually means. How do you hear the divine?
It's not about literal sounds, it's more about attuning to a deeper frequency, sensing the vibration of energy that flows through everything. It's
Oh.
like tapping into a hidden dimension of perception.
Whoa, that's trippy. Do they give any examples of what that might feel like?
Yeah, they describe someone hearing colors while gardening. It suggests a blending of senses, where the boundaries between our normal modes of perception become fluid.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. But if this cosmic symphony is always playing, why don't we all hear it? Is it something we have to, like, learn or develop?
That's a great question, and one that the source explores in some detail. They suggest that our modern lifestyles often create a lot of internal noise, mental chatter, stress, distractions. That can make it really hard to tune into those subtler frequencies.
So it's like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And they propose that practices like meditation, mindfulness, and spending time in nature can help us quiet that internal storm and create space for those deeper perceptions to emerge.
So it's not just about being open to these experiences, but also about actively cultivating the conditions that make them more likely.
Exactly. And the source suggests that this cultivation isn't just for personal benefit. It might also impact how we relate to the world around us, how we treat each other, and how we approach the big questions of life.
Okay, I can see how that could be a real game changer. But before we dive into those implications, I'm curious to hear more about what the source says about specific practices for cultivating this deeper awareness. What are some of the tools they suggest?
That's a great question. That takes us into the realm of spiritual practices, contemplative traditions, and even the wisdom of ancient cultures. Let's unpack those insights in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've talked about all these mystical experiences, the role of nature, the unique perspectives of children, and even that cosmic symphony idea. But how do we actually, like, tune into that deeper frequency? What are some ways to actually cultivate this awareness?
Well, the source doesn't have like a one-size-fits-all answer or anything, but it does mention a variety of practices that have been used across different cultures to cultivate a deeper connection to the divine, for centuries.
So it's not about finding the right method, but more about exploring different pathways.
Yeah, finding what resonates with you. The source specifically talks about meditation as a powerful tool for quieting the mind and creating space for these experiences.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've talked about how our busy minds create so much static, making it hard to tune into those subtler frequencies. Meditation seems like a pretty good way to turn down the volume on all that mental chatter.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the source emphasizes that meditation doesn't have to be this rigid, formal practice or anything. It can be as simple as taking a few minutes each day to focus on your breath, observe your thoughts without judgment, or even just connect with the sensations in your body.
So it's about finding those moments of stillness, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Exactly. And, it's not just about sitting still with your eyes closed. The source also talks about cultivating mindfulness in our everyday activity.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, it's about bringing awareness to the present moment,
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Whether you're washing dishes, walking the dog, having a conversation, the idea is to really engage with the experience, noticing the sights, the sounds, the sensations, even your own thoughts and feelings without judgment.
So being fully present
Exactly.
instead of letting our minds wander.
Yeah, to the past or the future.
Got it. And the source suggests this kind of mindful awareness can help us to appreciate the beauty and wonder around us.
Yeah, that's often hidden in plain sight.
It's like we're training our minds to see the world with fresh eyes, to notice those subtle details we might normally miss.
Exactly. And it's not just about those internal practices like meditation and mindfulness. The source also talks about connecting with nature, engaging in creative pursuits, and cultivating gratitude as ways to deepen our connection with the divine.
So it's about finding those activities that nourish our souls.
Yeah, that spark our creativity, that help us to see the world with this sense of awe and appreciation.
Exact.
The source ends on this really beautiful note. It reminds us that even a grain of sand, when viewed with the right kind of attention, can reveal a universe of beauty and complexity.
I love that. It's that idea that the divine is present in everything. If we just open our hearts and minds to see it, it's about shifting our perspective from seeing the world as separate from us to recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web of being.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And ultimately, the source suggests that this journey of cultivating awareness, it's a deeply personal one. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's about finding the practices and perspectives that resonate with you, that help you experience the world with more wonder, connection, and meaning.
So if you're listening to this and feeling inspired to explore these ideas further, we encourage you to experiment. Be curious. Trust your own inner guidance. What practices or perspectives might help you tap into that sense of awe and connection? What small changes can you make to cultivate a greater awareness of the divine in everything around you?
Remember, this is your journey. Embrace the mystery. Keep diving deeper.